The first thing that hits you at Marsh Farm, according to one reporter who made the journey to see it for herself, is not the architectural grandeur you might expect from royal property. It is the smell, that thick, unmistakable scent of wet mud and boggy terrain, the kind of damp, low-lying air that tells you everything about where one man's world has fundamentally shifted. Not roses, not the manicured perfection of palace lawns clipped to impossible symmetry, not the polished, reverent hush that typically surrounds a royal residence, but something far more elemental and far more telling about the verdict that has been rendered in brick, fencing, and swampy ground. For a man born at Buckingham Palace, a figure who once moved through the world with the certainty that came with that birthright, this particular detail lands with a force that no official statement ever could, because what we are witnessing here is not simply a change of address. It is something far more consequential, far more symbolic. After more than 2 decades at Royal Lodge, Prince Andrew Mountbatten Windsor has finally been pushed, nudged, and quietly managed into his new life at Marsh Farm, a 5-bedroom house situated on the Sandringham estate that sounds sufficiently respectable when you read it on paper. But in the vocabulary of tabloids and royal watchers, it carries the unmistakable symbolism of a dramatic fall from grace, the kind of move that nobody in his position would ever have chosen for himself, the kind of arrangement that represents everything he has lost. And what makes the entire situation even more cutting is the drawn-out hesitation that preceded it. He did not stride confidently into this new chapter with the bearing of a man accepting a quieter life. By multiple accounts, Andrew stalled. He hovered, he dragged his heels. He kept bouncing back and forth between Wood Farm and Marsh Farm, moving between temporary accommodation and the house that had been prepared for him, as though he could somehow delay the reality of what was happening. That hesitation, that reluctance, that resistance told its own story far more eloquently than any words could have. This was not a prince embracing a period of reflection, or a man content with a simpler existence. This was a disgraced royal being eased, nudged, and finally, when subtlety had run its course, quietly managed into smaller surroundings that he clearly did not want and never accepted. Which is where the role of Prince Edward becomes so profoundly telling in this narrative. The reports indicate that Edward had a quiet word with his older brother, sometime shortly before Easter, a moment that came after considerable frustration had been building over Andrew's persistent reluctance to make the move. And at that point, suddenly, the entire situation took on that peculiarly royal tone that outsiders sometimes struggle to understand. Nobody raises their voice. Nobody makes scenes. Nobody issues ultimatums in the dramatic fashion you might see in ordinary families. Instead, everyone simply understands exactly what is happening, and the message gets delivered through the most subtle of channels. Charles, of course, could not be seen directly pushing his brother out. The king being publicly linked to forcing Andrew into exile of any kind would have created a public relations catastrophe for the entire institution. So the younger brother, Edward, appears instead. Edward steps into the role of messenger, of enforcer, of the one who finally gets the job done. And commentators quickly picked up on this, describing Edward in rather unflattering terms as the family's henchman. It is a brutal phrase, certainly, but it stuck for a very good reason. It captures the awkwardness of the entire arrangement with precision, because Andrew was once the one people deferred to, the one whose word carried weight within royal circles, the one around whom others arranged themselves. Now, another brother is being sent in to finish the job, to deliver the message that cannot be softened any further. Even the timing of this interaction managed to make him look diminished. Edward and Sophie had apparently hoped to use Wood Farm over the Easter holiday for themselves, but with Andrew still hanging about, still loitering in temporary accommodation, still creating an awkward presence on the estate, they were forced to use a holiday let instead. Just sit with how shabby that makes the situation look. A former Duke of York, one of the Queen's favorite sons in another era, still loitering in accommodation that is not his own, still creating enough of a problem that he inconveniences other members of the family until someone finally has to have the uncomfortable conversation that forces him to move. Royal life is obsessed with choreography and careful staging. Everything about it is controlled. Every entrance, every appearance, every message managed down to the smallest detail. This situation, by contrast, looks like a production slipping badly off its script, a moment where the usual refinement and control have broken down. Then there is the house itself, the physical structure at the center of this entire narrative. Marsh Farm may sit within the vastness of Sandringham's sprawling estates and protected grounds, but the property we are discussing here is not some grand substitute for Royal Lodge, not some alternative palace designed to soften the blow of displacement. It is 5 bedrooms. 5 for most people. 5 bedrooms sounds genuinely lavish, the kind of property that would represent tremendous privilege, But for Andrew, according to one account, it was almost hard to process the reality of what was being offered. This is said to be the smallest home he has occupied since he left his Buckingham Palace apartment decades ago. And that is the detail that really bites. Not because 5 bedrooms is objectively small in any conventional sense, but because within royal circles, hierarchy is measured in a fundamentally different way. Spaces equal status. Rooms are rank made visible. Corridors are positions of power. Going from a 30-room lodge to this 5-bedroom farmhouse is not downsizing in the ordinary sense. It is public demotion, rendered in square footage and floor plans. And yet even within this demotion, traces of old expectation and old privilege still linger in peculiar ways. The house reportedly has no permanent room for living staff, which on its own says an enormous amount about the scale of the downgrade being undertaken. But Charles is said to have offered ad hoc access to staff from Sandringham House proper, meaning that cleaners and groundsmen and even a cook can still be summoned when he requests them. That arrangement on one level seems thoughtful. On another level, it is almost more humiliating than a complete withdrawal of service would have been. It preserves the habit of privilege, the muscle memory of expectation, while making perfectly clear that privilege no longer belongs to him by right. Help is available, but only by allowance, not by entitlement, only when summoned, not as a given. Ahead of his arrival, Marsh Farm was also heavily worked on and renovated, and the details of those improvements tell their own small story about how much effort was invested in making this transition palatable. Sky television had already been installed. Flooring firms with royal connections were seen at the property. Carpets and laminate mattered. Broadband mattered. Creature comforts mattered profoundly. One earlier report even suggested that Andrew could be philosophical about the move, that he could accept this transition so long as he had television, decent internet access, horses nearby, and a golf club within reasonable reach. It is such a revealing little list, is it not? Not duty, not service, not purpose or redemption or any attempt at restoration through meaningful work. Just the creature comforts of a man trying to soften the edges of a fall he never really accepted. Then came the pest issue, and with Andrew, even the practicalities have a way of turning into symbolism. At the start of the year, professional pest control was sent to Marsh Farm after dozens of molehills appeared across the front lawn. Staff were also dealing with mice trying to get inside the property. So before the disgraced royal had even properly settled into his new home, the estate was already battling creatures tunneling through the grass and rodents attempting to breach the barriers. It sounds faintly comic in description, but in Andrew's particular case, it feels almost too perfectly symbolic. He leaves one scandal-ridden existence behind and arrives at another property where the ground itself appears unsettled and compromised. The local conditions make the situation even more awkward and almost darkly ironic. Marsh Farm sits near boggy land on terrain described as swampy and below sea level, with the North Sea only about a mile away across flat Norfolk countryside. Flooding is said to be a genuine and ongoing risk, something the residents have to manage and live with. That matters because royal property usually projects something very different. It projects permanence. It projects solidity. It projects the sense of inherited stability that carries across generations. This place, by contrast, comes wrapped in entirely different language. Damp, marsh, mud, vulnerability. Not exactly the vocabulary associated with restored dignity or a man being rehabilitated into society. The Mirror reporter who actually visited the property said the house looked relatively humble by royal standards. Large, yes, certainly spacious enough, but not imposing in the way you might expect. It came complete with outbuildings and grounds, yet hardly the kind of place that would stop you in your tracks or inspire the sense of grandeur associated with royal residences. She described the garden as having a neglected, sleepy quality to it, as though it had been left to its own devices for some time. She admitted she had expected more of a fortress, given the intense public scrutiny Andrew now attracts and the genuine tensions that surround him. But instead of finding something fortified and defensive, she found a house that looked less like a bastion and more like a retreat that nobody would particularly envy. That may help explain another striking feature of his new arrangement, the extensive privacy measures that have been installed. Before moving in, Andrew made absolutely certain that Marsh Farm was wrapped into the wider no-fly zone that already protects Sandringham's airspace. A 6-foot fence was also added around the property itself, solid and clearly meant to signal boundaries. On one level, that is simple security, basic protective measures. On another level, it feels like the natural physical architecture of his current life. Screens, barriers, restrictions, distance, contained but not confined, protected but not embraced. He is not being restored to the heart of royal society. He is being placed and maintained at its absolute edge, separated by fences and airspace restrictions and geographical distance. And perhaps that is the most quietly savage part of this entire arrangement. The monarchy has a very refined way of making a point, without ever making a scene, without ever raising its voice or issuing dramatic ultimatums. Andrew has not been dumped in some obviously punitive location. He is still on a royal estate. He still has land around him. He still has controlled comforts available to him. He still has occasional staff support when it is requested. But everything about Marsh Farm, every detail from the bog-laden ground, to the molehills, to the limited staff, to the size of the house, everything says the same thing in softer language. Near, but not central. Provided for, but not honored. Protected, but not embraced. The role of Prince Edward underlines that distance. So does the fact that Charles, by all accounts, cannot be seen getting too close. So does the decision to place him on the Sandringham estate rather than Windsor. So does the size of the house, the permanent absence of living staff, the endless emphasis on privacy and security, and even the fact that the property had to be extensively worked on before he could be persuaded to accept it. None of this looks like rehabilitation in any genuine sense. It looks like management. It looks like containment. And Andrew seems to know it. One source claimed that when he first saw the house, he looked unimpressed but resigned, as though he had finally realized that this simply is his future now. That may be the bleakest detail in this entire narrative. Not outrage, not defiance, not some dramatic gesture of resistance, but resignation. A man who once lived with the full weight of his rank behind him, who once moved through the world with the assumption that royal status could absorb almost anything, now being told in effect, this is where the line is drawn. For years, Andrew carried himself with the absolute entitlement of someone who genuinely believed that his position would protect him from consequences. That illusion has been stripped away piece by piece. First came the public disgrace. Then came the institutional distance from the family. Then came the loss of Royal Lodge. Now comes this, a 5-bedroom farmhouse on damp North Norfolk ground with pest control vans on the drive and molehills in the lawn. A fence for privacy, a no-fly zone overhead. His younger brother cast in the role of the one who finally got him through the door. That is Andrew's new life now. Not exile in the dramatic sense. Because the monarchy rarely does drama out loud. It prefers symbolism. And symbolism can be so very much colder, so very much more final, and so very much harder to escape than any proclamation ever could be.